I have no plan for this video. We're just gonna take it where it goes. But I have a new obsession, so we're gonna talk about it. Hello, everyone. So for those who don't know me, I have read some Lewis McMaster of Bejeweled in the past. Curse of the Challenger was on my top standalone list and top book list for the year. And I said I was going to read the Vorkosigan Saga in 2023, and I made the extremely bad decision to fail at doing that. But I haven't read all of it. I have read Shards of Honor through Memory, but I think there's Weatherman is one that some people read in there, and I also haven't read Falling 3 or the Ethan of Athnos. Those of you who haven't read the Vorkosigan Saga, I just spouted the random gibberish. So let me make a case for you about why this should be in the future plans for your life. So, let's talk about what makes it good. Kind of an unreasonable amount of things. So this is it's a sci-fi series, and I would describe it. I'm going to be pitching this to my fellow Dresden fans, because it kind of has the elements that make Dresden work, where Dresden reads really fast. So does Vorkosigan. I binged this on my vacation. I was on vacation, and I read. It was I think a 14-day vacation, and I read like 8 Vorkosigan books, and I actually read it with time to spare. Then with the last couple days left, I was like, screw it, I'll reread Oathbringer again. But it reads really fast, but that's not what makes people like Dresden. Like people don't reread Dresden 7 times and like have it as their favorite series and or a top 5 series and freak out about changes, because it's fun. It is fun, but it's the underlying quality. And it's the same thing with the Vorkosigan Saga. And I've also this sounds biased because they're already 2 of my favorite authors, but the 2 authors who, and I believe one is by coincidence, the other is because Bejeweled is their favorite living author, is the 2 authors who it reminds me of reading is a combination of Robin Hobb and Jim Butcher. The Robin Hobb one is the one that I think is a coincidence. Louis Bejeweled is Jim's favorite living author, so that's not a coincidence. He's trying to do what Louis Bejeweled does. He's trying to tell similar style of stories, which I would say those style of stories are very plot and character driven. They explore themes well, but they do it by accident. They do it because that's a part of the exploration of character. And they're actually Louis Bejeweled is one of the best plotters I've ever read. They are pretty much always very well paced. Some of them have some somewhat janky pacing. Shards of Honor is paced a little bit weirdly. It was her debut novel. But more importantly, in terms of setup and payoff and how many details end up being important, they're all incredibly tight novels. So she's one of the best plotters that I've read, while also being one of the best character writers I've read. She actually writes does some of the best job at having despicable characters who you understand and empathize with, despite still understanding that they're horrible people. Normally the person who's most emphasized is Joe Abercrombie. Robin Hobb also does it incredibly well. Steven Erikson is known for it, but Bejeweled can, and I mean Robin Hobb as well, but whatever. Bejeweled can compete with any of them at that skill specifically. That being said, there's 2 main characters for the ones I've read. 2 asterisk Grapho. And they're both pretty good people. I would say. Miles is a total adrenaline junkie, but Miles is an honorable person generally, and Cordelia is definitely a good person. She's less flawed than Miles. But there's a lot of supporting characters who are really quite are bad people, and she has such a sense of humanity and understanding with them that just makes them read, they can still be such compelling people who you understand what caused them to be the way that they are, even if also, like, they suck. And often you do hate them at the same time. But she doesn't fall into the trap of believing that bad people are, like, the people who are just, like, straightforwardly bad people are single-faceted in their badness, that they spend all their time being bad. Like, bad people are bad people because in the small percentage of time they're bad, they're really bad, right? And on the topics where they're bad, they're really bad. They lack self-control in some aspects. Like, who's going around and doing bad things 100% of the time? This is why bad people still a lot of the time have, like, friends or, like, have a circle of people who don't know they're bad people because they don't spend all that time being bad people. And sometimes you're going to get the people who are in that circle of friends with someone who's with others who are truly despicable that they don't know about, and they aren't able to see them that way because they don't see them doing the really bad things. And yeah, it's just like, character-wise, I say all the time, like, Robin Hobb's my favorite character writer, blah, blah, blah. Then there's, like, a 8-way race for second, and Louise Bujold is in that, like, 8-way race for second. Like, she might be the second best character writer I've ever read. She might also be the 9th. I think she's better than a lot of people have. But man, there's a lot of good character writers. But she's like an A, if she is a top tier character writer. Also, I think the dialogue in Vorkosigan is very good. It's getting repetitive, but the two main ways dialogue can be good, because dialogue can be good because it's, like, technically good at characterization, where it communicates aspects of the characters, and, like, different characters have different voices, and it's that, but also it's funny. Like, Vorkosigan's hilarious. The series is hilarious, especially the Miles books, because Miles is just wildly entertaining. And it's like, it's funny, but it's like subdued funny. Like, real life is funny, but real life is not making jokes. It's just funny things happen all the time if you see it that way. And it's like, Vorkosigan it doesn't feel like the book is trying to be like, now we're gonna stop and make a joke. It's just like, just funny things. There's just funny things, and Bujold is just very quietly hilarious in the background. Like, just as you're reading this really good book, it's just quietly, wildly entertaining. Which is why one of my favorite books in the series is The Warrior's Apprentice, which is the third one. It's the first Miles one, and mostly it's just because I was wildly entertained, and it would have been like, that was really good, and then things got much more, consequences happened. That's the other thing Lois Bujold had. Like, probably if I were to pick two things that for me are, like, the most important when it comes to quality, very broadly, it's attention to detail that Lois Bujold definitely has, especially with her plotting, like the amount of details that end up being important, which is a different kind of attention to detail. Like, some attention to detail is, like, the details might not end up being important, but just, like, you can tell the author considered them. Lois Bujold has that as well. But attention to detail and consequences. And it's got consequences as well, like, where characters' actions and the things they do aren't just brushed over. Like, they have legitimate consequences. And man, it's really good. I'm going to quickly talk about each of the books. So, Shards of Honor. Also, the reading order for this is super complicated because Lois Bujold is an absolute madwoman who wrote them in, like, random order. Like, publication order. I looked at publication order after reading it, and I'm legitimately baffled. Like, this would be like if you sat down to write Wheel of Time, and you're like, okay, I'll write Eye of the World first, because that makes sense. Then I'm going to write The Shadow Rising and Fires of Heaven. And then I'm going to go write Knife of Dreams. Okay. And next, I guess I should write The Great Hunt and The Dragon Reborn, because that makes sense. And then I'll write The Gathering Storm and Towers of Midnight, and then yeah, I'll go back and I'll write like Crown of Swords, Path of Daggers, and it's just like random order. But like it doesn't read like that. Like if you hadn't told me that, you'd think this would lead to things being clunky and awkward and inconsistent all the time. But like I didn't notice that, and I especially don't get it. Well, I especially don't get it with like when she wrote Brothers in Arms. Like she wrote Brothers in Arms, I think like fourth. I know a lot of you watching haven't read Brothers in Arms, but like, what? Anyway, that makes no sense. It's completely wild. Don't read it in publication order. I know usually the rule is publication order always, because, and the thought process is one that I agree with, because the author, when they wrote that, was aware of the things they'd written. But, and the downside is that, like, it can be clunky if you read it chronologically, because, like, when she wrote The Warrior's Apprentice, she hadn't written Barrayar, so you'd think there would be a bunch of things that happened in Barrayar that she wasn't aware of, because she hadn't written it yet, that make Warrior's Apprentice clunky if you read them in chronological order. But, like, that doesn't happen, because Bejeweled is built different, and you'll just spoil yourself and be like, what's going on? Like, these started, I think, as standalones, but then, like, she kept following up arcs she'd already started, and then it created, like, a bunch of different sub-arcs. So I think the reading order I did is really good. There's probably slight variations you could do to this that still work, but the order I read the first 9 in was Shards of Honor, Barrayar, The Warrior's Apprentice, The Vorgame, Setaganda, the entire collection of 3 novellas, The Borders of Infinity, Brothers in Arms, Mirror Dance, Memory. And those are the 9 that I've read. And that worked quite well. I know a lot of people have Borders of Infinity after Brother in Arms. People on Discord told me to read it before, and I agree. Brother in Arms pretty directly references Borders of Infinity a lot. And so this is another thing where it's like she hadn't written Borders of Infinity when she wrote Brothers in Arms. But, like, the character of Miles in Brothers in Arms has gone through a lot, and he's dealing with a lot of the stuff he dealt with that happened in Borders of Infinity. And, like, it's consistent when you read it both ways. And I don't get how that exists. Like, I don't get how it doesn't break. But it doesn't. Like, it doesn't break when you go in chronological order. So I would highly recommend doing it that way. A lot of people say to start with Warrior's Apprentice. And I think the reason behind that is that there's information the POV character for Warrior's Apprentice doesn't know about what happened in the first 2 books, and you get kind of a reveal at the same time as the POV character gets the reveal, which I understand. But I like it the way where where you get the asymmetric information where you know more than the reader, because I think it actually creates dramatic tension where, like, you can see the storm coming, but the POV character can't. And, like, at one point I was, like, panicking because, like, I could see the bad things. I could sense the danger. Like, I could see the exclamation point. But Miles is in a book. I know he's in a book. I can see that this bad thing is coming, and he couldn't. And I think the dramatic tension... It's hard to know because I didn't do it the other way. Like, someone doing it... It's probably that they're both good both ways. But... And also it does... Like, Warrior's Apprentice does spoil Barrier. Like, you might forget because, like, it just says things that happen. But, it's actually, like... The origins, like, are pretty detailed. And I imagine that would remove some tension for Barrier. Like, kind of knowing that Miles exists already in some ways removes tension from Barrier, but that's pretty unavoidable at that point. That's kind of like... I mean, that's true for, like, every ongoing series where there's a main point of view where, like, I know Harry Dresden, if I'm reading book 4 for the first time, isn't going to die because there's, like, books 5 through 17 exist. And that's just kind of unavoidable, and I think that's unavoidable here. I'm going to talk about the individual books now, spoiler-free, really quickly, what makes them good. Shards of Honor gets straight, like, it does the thing where the inciting incident is on page, like, 2, and it introduces you to the world while having events happen. Like, you learn, you scramble to learn as you are following events. It doesn't spend a bunch of time introducing you to things and then have events started. It's way faster paced than Curse of the Chalian. It's centered around 2 main characters, and they're just both a delight. I think the source of conflict, like, it's a little more generic in terms of the characters and the source of conflict. That generic's the wrong word. It's not generic, but it doesn't quite have the feel of uniqueness. Miles is such a unique character later, and Barrayar, to me, like, the actual conflict is a more unique and mature story. Shards of Honor feels more Star Trek, but without aliens and more violence. But it just does it really well. It just does it with very coherently well-written characters who pop off the page and you understand very quickly, and a supporting cast who you get to really understand who they are, and the story just continually goes in interesting directions. It takes an interesting path. So it just does what I would consider a not super unique sci-fi story very well. And it would be, like, I think, good for, like, a palate cleanser if you want to not read something. If you've been, reading Malazan or something, like, really complicated, and you want to read something a little bit more straightforward. It's fast. It reads very easily. One thing I really respect, like, about Louise Bujold is how she varies her style. I've read now a few of her different POV characters, and they all have their own distinct writing style. It's one of those where I think if she wrote multi-POV books, people would talk about her with Joe Abercrombie as, like, in terms of how good she is at character voice. Like, I think she's as good as anyone I've ever read. At that, it's just less noticeable because you have to read multiple books by her with multiple different POVs to notice. And she also, like, her writing style, I think, varies with the, like, faster-paced sci-fi. It reads a little easier. It's probably like Chalian, I think, is a little bit more stylized in terms of prose, kind of to fit with the sci-fi aesthetic. Which Chalian is, I have a review of Curse of the Chalian. It's also excellent. If that sounds more interesting to you, go for it. I will not tell you you're wrong. Chalian rules. This is just about why Vorkosigan rules. And then Barrayar, most people like Barrayar more than Shards of Honor. I like them about equally, but that's just because I think I like Shards of Honor more than most people. Barrayar, as I said, I think is a more mature story. It is a direct follow-up of Shards of Honor. Like, it takes place right after the end of Shards of Honor. And it definitely feels more unique and more distinctive. It doesn't quite isn't as instantly compelling, in my opinion, but by the end, I think it's just as good, if not a little bit better. And then Warrior's Apprentice is a pivot, because we get a different main character who is, I would say, more unique, and is one of my favorite characters in fiction. Like, Miles Vorkosigan, right now, if I did a favorite characters list, he's easily in the top 10. He might be in the top 5. Like, he's one of the best written... He's one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. I think he's completely brilliant. He's both, like, has a lot of depth and complexity to him and uniqueness. He's also just incredibly entertaining. He's like, it's like a cross of Harry Dresden and Tyrion Lannister, but completely distinct from both at the same time, because he's his own people, but, like, has qualities, like, that make both of them interesting characters kind of related to it, where... And that starts with Warrior's Apprentice, which Warrior's Apprentice is so fun, and then gets so good. And then after that, you have the Vor game, which I think isn't quite as tight as Warrior's Apprentice, but is still really, really good. And then you got Setagonda, which I think is the most standalone-y side quest of any of the main books, and it is my least favorite that I've read so far, but I gave it like an 8.5 out of 10 because it's still fantastically plotted with great characters. It's hilarious. It's tense. It's got a good resolution. Like, but it is a little side questy. I'm not gonna lie. And then Borders of Infinity is a collection of 3 novellas. But the first and third novella were brilliant. The second had a really weird moment that I don't know why it had, but I still quite liked, even if it just had one weird thing. And then you've got the Brother in Arms, Mirror Dance, Memory, 1, 2, 3 Punch, which each became my favorite book in the series as I read them. Okay, that wasn't coherent. It was never going to be coherent. There was no planning, but that's me rambling about the Vorkosigan Saga for 20 minutes. This feels like one of the series that I can recommend very broadly. Sometimes I read a new favorite, and I'm like, this is really hard to recommend. The Dandelion Dynasty. Like, Book of the New Sun. Like, I can't go recommend these to people. This is like... It's hard for me to, like, I don't know who I would be like, oh, you like reading sci-fi and fantasy? You won't like the Vorkosigan Saga. I mean, obviously some people here won't like the Vorkosigan Saga, but sometimes it's, like, obvious someone won't like something, right? Like, Johanna talks about this, where it's like, I'm not going to recommend Piranesi to Alan. Like, this I feel like there's no one I can think of who I'm like, oh yeah, you definitely won't like this Vorkosigan. You'll hate it. Like, if you know me and we sometimes interact with each other, you'll probably like the Vorkosigan Saga. If you like at all similar books to me, but especially like, especially like if you want something to scratch the Dresden itch, but I will admit, it has this advantage over Dresden. The first 2 books are instantly really good. Like, Barrayar is a lot of people, like, in contention with a lot of people for being their favorite with good reason. Barrayar is brilliant. Book 3's brilliant. Book 1's really, really good. Like, it's just good instantly. But it scratches the, like, palate cleanser, not challenging, but bingeable book that has underlying quality. And it's one of my favorite series now. And I'm really excited to read the rest of them. I'm not binging the rest of them because we're back from vacation. We're going to sprinkle them in. But I'm glad to see I'm not washed up and still can binge a series because that was a delight. And Vin is now in frame to support me in my love of the Vorkosigan Saga by Louis McMaster Bujold. So put it on the list. And, you know, if you have read it and dislike it, I'm curious, can you comment what you may think disliking it without insulting people who like it? Shouldn't be a hard challenge. I believe it. I'm actually very curious. Cause a lot of like things books, if I read them and like them, I can see like a lot of people I know already dislike them, but actually not that many people I know have read the Vorkosigan Saga, and like everyone I know who has read it likes it. So I haven't seen like a 1 or 2 star review of like one of the Vorkosigan books from someone who like I know. So if you're someone who can phrase it well, I'd be really curious what caused you to not like it, because I'd just be interested to know. And if you've read it and really like it, tell me that too, because it'll make me happy. And let me know if I convinced you to move it up in your plans. Have a good day, everyone.